What if the calmest person you know was actually incapable of feeling empathy? Not that healthy calm, not the admirable emotional balance, but an absent silent, a void where there should be guilt, fear, remorse. Psychopaths don't scream. They watch you. They don't need to raise their voices. There's no need to threaten. You don't need to show anger. The true social predator learns early on that those who make noise attract attention, and attention is not an advantage. Invisibility is. Have you ever felt like someone seemed too normal, too polite, too controlled, always with the right answer, always with the look fixed, attentive, measuring your every reaction? Something there felt too tight, as if there were calculation where there should be spontaneity. Most people associate danger with explosions, explicit aggressiveness, the violence visible, but the truly disturbing behavior is what hides beneath the socially acceptable surface. The mask does not shake, the voice doesn't fail, the smile is calibrated, and while you relax, it records. Record your fears, your insecurities, your limits. Record what embarrasses you, that blames you, what makes you want to please. Here we analyze what few realize. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? There is a subtle difference between self-control and emotional absence. The first requires internal effort. The second is natural, cold, clean, no conflict. Can you imagine not feeling guilt? Can you imagine hurting someone and sleeping soundly afterwards? Most can't, because the average human brain reacts. The heart rate goes up, the stomach tightens, the mind revisits the scene. Regret weighs heavily. But some individuals do not experience this process in the same way. They don't scream. They watch. They watch how you react to a compliment, how you react to criticism. Observe how much. How long does it take you to doubt yourself? They notice if you explain yourself too much. C apologizes for existing. Have you ever met someone who seemed to study you? Not in an affectionate way, but strategic. Our community learns to identify invisible patterns. Because the social predator doesn't reveal itself on the first meeting. He tests, he measures, he simulates empathy. He copies emotions. It delivers exactly what you expect to see. And you feel connection. You feel like someone finally understands you. But what you feel as connection may just be mirroring. There is something deeply unsettling about the idea that someone might look at you without as a person, but as a resource. Emotional resource. Financial resource. Social resource. Have you ever realized this too late? Maybe the danger was never the scream. Maybe it was always silence. And if the biggest warning sign is not aggressiveness, but absolute serenity in the face of suffering of others, here we investigate what almost no one wants to see. Because the real risk is not in chaos, it's calm. And what happens when you start to realize that that calm may not be balance, but absence? That's what we're going to unveil now. There is a specific moment when the social predator decides that you are worth the effort. Investment. It's not at first glance. It's the first reaction. Psychopaths don't scream. They watch you. They observe how you deal with small frustrations. They notice if you try to justify your mistakes even when you didn't make mistakes. They observe whether you need to be accepted. Observe if you fear conflict. Have you ever noticed how some people ask too many questions, but reveal almost nothing? Nothing about you. They do not share real vulnerabilities, just controlled versions of themselves. Small stories strategically chosen to seem human, but not intimate. In the work environment, it could be that colleague who never loses control, never shows nervousness, never seems shaken by difficult decisions that harm others. While everyone feels the weight, he feels efficiency. In the family, it may be that relative who discreetly provokes, creates subtle rivalries, plants doubts, and then watches the chaos as if he were a spectator. In an emotional relationship, it could be someone who at first seems too perfect, too attentive, too much present. And then, slowly, it starts to test limits. A light criticism here, an irony there, A calculated silence after something you said sincerely. Have you ever ignored a comment that belittled you, just to keep the peace? How many times have you laughed at something that hurt? The psychopath's invisible behavior is not explosive. It's incremental. Small changes in your perception, small distortions in your security. He watches how much you tolerate. If you confront, if you retreat, if you adapt. Our community learns to recognize micro-behaviors because the pattern is almost mathematical. First, it creates connection. Then, it creates dependence. Then, test resistance. If you accept the test, it moves forward. There is a psychological technique called intermittent reinforcement. Toggle reward and withdrawal, approximation and coldness, approval and indifference. The average human brain becomes more attached when the reward is unpredictable. Have you ever felt more attached to someone just when they started to fall apart? Move away? This is no coincidence. It's calculation. The functional psychopath understands, even without formally studying, how to explore patterns, basic emotions. He notices when you need validation, realize when you're afraid of abandonment, and then he uses it, but not in an obvious way. He never seems villainous. On the contrary, it often feels like a victim. Have you ever seen someone turn a situation around so subtly that, in the end, you ended up asking excuses? Here we investigate what almost no one wants to see. Invisible behavior leaves no visible bruises, leaves doubt, leaves confusion. It leaves that strange feeling that you are overdoing it. And while you question yourself, it collects data. He learns which words destabilize you, what memories weaken you, what insecurities do you try to hide. He doesn't scream, he watches. And the uncomfortable question begins to arise. Does this remind you of someone specific? What differentiates someone who is cold from someone who is simply controlled? The answer is not in external behavior. It's in the inner workings. In clinical psychology, there is a set of traits called the dark triad: psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. But psychopathy has something unique. It involves the absence of effective empathy. It's not that the person doesn't understand what you feel. She understands. But don't sit together. There is a difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Cognitive is the ability to understand the emotions of others. Emotional is the ability to experience an internal echo of that emotion. The functional psychopath usually has the first, but not the second. This means he can recognize sadness on your face, identify insecurity in your voice, noticing tension in your body, and using it strategically. Can you see the level of advantage in this? Neuroscience studies show that in individuals with high psychopathic traits, areas such as the amygdala, responsible for processing fear and response emotional, present reduced activity in the face of stimuli that normally would provoke an intense emotional reaction. Translation: what for you generates physical discomfort, for him it may only generate curiosity. While your heart races, his stays steady. As you mentally review an awkward bedtime conversation, he sleep. No replay, no guilt, no conflict. This does not mean that all cold individuals are psychopaths. Self-control is learned. Emotional regulation is maturity. But emotional absence is another thing. It's structural. Research indicates that a small percentage of the population has high levels of psychopathic traits, especially in highly competitive corporate environments. Does this surprise you? The popular image of the psychopath is violent, chaotic, but many are functional, elegant, socially competent. They don't break rules impulsively. They break when it's worth it. The empathetic brain suffers when it causes harm. The nervous system reacts. There is activation real physiological. The psychopathic brain tends to process risk and consequences in an instrumental way, not moral. The question is not, is this right? The question is, does it work? Have you ever met someone who didn't seem to learn from the suffering they caused? Not because I didn't understand, but because he didn't care. Our community learns to differentiate strategic coldness from emotional maturity, because the contrast is subtle. The empathetic person can be firm, can impose limits, can even seem distant in some situations. Moments. But when you realize you have hurt someone unfairly, there is discomfort. The functional psychopath can apologize, but the request is a tool. It's not regret. There is a disturbing fact. Many individuals with high psychopathic traits are described initially as charismatic, charming, confident. Charisma does not come from emotional depth. It comes from the absence of social anxiety. They do not fear judgment. They are not afraid of rejection. They are not afraid of emotional exposure, because there is no real vulnerability there. Now think, how many times have you confused confidence with character? How many times have you interpreted intensity as depth? Here we analyze what few realize. Understanding the science does not make the topic more comfortable. Make it clearer, and clarity sometimes hurts. Now I want you to think about someone specific, not on a distant criminal, not in an extreme figure. Someone real, someone who crossed your path. Maybe someone who at first seemed too intense, too attentive, too interested in your story. Have you ever felt like you were read quickly by someone, as if that person had understood their weaknesses too soon? At first this feels like connection. It looks like chemistry, it seems like destiny. But there is a difference between someone who connects and someone who collects information. The functional psychopath does not approach on emotional impulse. He approaches for usefulness. And here's the uncomfortable part. You often offer the information without perceive. You talk about your fear of abandonment. He talks about his difficult relationship with his parents. Talk about insecurity with your body. Tells about the need for recognition. And he listens. In silence. No judgment. Without interruption. No exaggerated expression. You feel welcomed, but what you feel as welcoming may just be analysis. Has this ever happened to you? At some point, that same person started using exactly his vulnerabilities against you. Not directly. In a subtle way. A phrase that hits exactly where it hurts. A comment that activates an old insecurity. A strategic comparison. And when you react, he looks surprised. You are exaggerating. I was just kidding. You are very sensitive. Suddenly, you start to doubt your own perception. This is the psychological tipping point. The victim does not lose his reason all at once, loses little by little. First, ask about one detail. Then, question your memory. Then he questions his own judgment. Have you ever left a conversation feeling confused, even though you entered it confidently? Our community learns to observe these internal changes, because the deeper damage is not visible. It's cognitive. The functional psychopath understands something essential. If he can make you doubt yourself, even, you become easier to shape. He doesn't need to control his actions, just control your perception. And then comes the question that almost no one likes to ask. At what point did you start apologizing for things you didn't do? Have you started to explain yourself too much? Have you started reviewing messages before sending, afraid of misinterpreting them? Have you started to lower opinions to avoid conflict? There is a silent strategy called psychological erosion. It's not a direct attack, it's wear and tear. Small repeated invalidations, small emotional tests, small reversals of guilt, until you adapt, until you tread carefully, until you think twice before speaking. And while this happens, he watches, he measures, he adjusts. Here we investigate what almost no one wants to see, because admitting that we were studied is uncomfortable, but ignoring the signs is even more dangerous. Now think honestly. Have you ever felt smaller around someone who, to others, seemed exemplary? There is a common mistake when we think about psychological danger. We imagine the attack, but the real movement happens first. The functional psychopath does not start by destroying. He starts by testing. A slightly disrespectful comment, a small lie, a limit crossed unintentionally. He watches your reaction. If you confront him, he backs down. Smile, minimize. If you accept it, it moves forward. Do you notice the pattern? It's not an impulse, it's an experiment. He is measuring your tolerance. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called progressive desensitization. Repeated exposure to stimuli that previously caused discomfort until you become Get used to. This is how boundaries expand. First you find it strange, then you rationalize, then you normalize, and when you realize it, you've already adapted. Have you ever found yourself justifying behaviors that you initially thought were unacceptable? He's just stressed. She had a difficult childhood. It's not always like that. As you build explanations, it builds control. The interpretive twist is this. The goal is not to immediately harm. It's training you. Train your reaction. Train your silence. Train your emotional submission. Our community learns to identify when a behavior is not failure. It is testing, because the test always comes in disguise. And here comes something even more disturbing. The functional psychopath rarely displays uncontrolled anger. It can even simulate vulnerability. You can feign regret. It may demonstrate fear of losing you. But watch the sequence. It goes beyond a limit. You react. It softens. You relieve. Intermittent reward. You feel like progress has been made. But was there? Or just a strategic adjustment? There is a difference between human error and a manipulative pattern. Human error creates genuine discomfort. The manipulative pattern generates calculation. Can you feel this difference? If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people. Because the next stage is no longer testing. It's consolidation. Once he understands his limits, he begins to isolate. Not necessarily physically distancing you from others, but planting doubts. I think that friend of yours is strange. Your family doesn't understand you like I do. They are jealous of your evolution. Small seeds. Have you ever noticed how some relationships start to seem exclusive to each other more? As if only that person really understands you. That's not deep connection. It could be emotional confinement. The real danger is not in explicit aggression. It is in the gradual reduction of your world. He doesn't scream. He watches. And when you are sure that you are already emotionally adjusted to his standard, he stops testing and start using it. Comment. Ignored alert or coincidence? Do you believe that psychopaths are born this way or become it? Because the next phase isn't just about discomfort. It involves loss. The deepest damage rarely happens at the beginning. It happens after you are already involved, after his perception was adjusted, after your limits were relaxed, after your trust has been misplaced. The real danger of prolonged coexistence with a functional psychopath is not just what he does, it's what you start to become. You begin to walk in a state of mild alertness, start measuring words, start anticipating reactions. Your nervous system learns that security is unpredictable. This creates cognitive confusion, small daily contradictions, promises that change, versions that change, and you try to mentally organize something that was meant to be disorganized. Have you ever noticed how, in certain relationships, you began to trust less own memory? Did I get it wrong? Did I exaggerate? Did I cause this? This constant doubt erodes identity. There's a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. When the reality you observe conflicts with the image you want to preserve. You know something is wrong, but you also want to believe that it isn't. Then you adjust the interpretation. Not because he's naive, but because it needs coherence. Our community learns that prolonged manipulation is not about intensity. It's about repetition. The functional psychopath can alternate between coldness and affection with precision, can offer moments of validation right after invalidation episodes. This creates emotional dependence. The brain starts looking for good moments as proof that everything can get better. But there is a cost. Reduced self-esteem, gradual isolation, feeling of constant insufficiency. You begin to adapt to avoid conflict. And the more you adapt, the more you distance yourself from yourself. The most unsettling thing is that, to the outside observer, nothing seems dramatically wrong. He is polite. He is articulate. He is socially functional. And you seem too sensitive. Does this remind you of any phase of your life? The psychopath does not need to destroy his reputation. Just create small parallel narratives. He tells different versions to different people. plant alternative interpretations. When you finally try to explain what is happening, there is already doubt in the environment, and you start to look unstable. This is the psychological siege. It's not violent. It's progressive. You lose external reference, loses validation, loses internal security. And then comes the question that no one likes to face. If someone watches you long enough, learns your patterns, understands your fears, and never feels guilty, how much control can this person exert before you realize it? There is something uncomfortable about admitting that evil rarely presents itself as a monster. It presents itself as normal, like efficiency, like balance, as someone who doesn't get carried away by emotions. But absence of emotion is not strength. It's a gap, and gaps can be dangerous when they are hidden behind tight social masks. Built. Psychopaths don't scream. They watch you, observe your needs, observe your cycles. They observe what you tolerate when you are afraid of losing. And perhaps the most disturbing question is not how to identify them, but why do we ignore the signs? There is a deep human tendency to seek coherence. We want to believe that the people are what they appear to be. We want to believe that intentions are aligned with words, because accepting otherwise requires constant vigilance, and tired. Here we are not looking for superficial entertainment. Here we investigate the human mind in its rawest form. If you are here, it is because you look beyond the surface, and that already changes your position. The functional psychopath depends on one thing: the emotional predictability of others. If he knows that you always try to save relationships, know that you avoid confrontation. If he knows you doubt yourself before you doubt him, he already has the advantage. But awareness breaks the pattern. When you start to notice micro-tests, micro-invalidations, micro-inversions of blame, something changes. You start to respond differently. Not aggressively, clearly. And clarity is a threat to those who depend on confusion. Our community learns to recognize masks, not to live in distrust of everyone, but not to blindly give yourself to just anyone. There is a difference between trusting and abandoning yourself, between loving and dissolving, between understanding and justifying the unjustifiable. Do you believe that psychopaths are born this way or become? Your opinion matters here, because understanding the origin does not change the effect. The effect is always the same. Someone watches while you feel. Someone calculates while you believe. Someone tests while you try to build. Send this video to someone who needs to understand this, because shared knowledge reduces isolation, and isolation is fertile territory for manipulation. Comment: have you noticed a pattern like this before? Here we explore what almost no one wants to see, not to create fear, but to create lucidity. The difference between being a recurring victim of destructive patterns and stopping them starts with perception, and perception begins with discomfort. If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. You don't need to become paranoid, but you need to become aware, because silence can be more revealing than screaming. Serenity can hide absence, and the most dangerous mask is the one that never slips. If you've made it this far, something has changed. You no longer observe people in the same way, and that's just the beginning.